Hello, I'm Leon Goodman. I was born in the West Texas town of El Paso, and I went to Ysleta High School. I recently had an email from a student who had graduated from that high school only 3 years ago. And he had read my memoirs that I had written when I went to my 50th high school reunion. And he appreciated what I said about the high school and the traditions and so forth. And I was very pleased to receive that letter. And in thanks to him, I decided I would give him the most valuable thing I had, which was my free advice, worth every cent you pay for it. And so I told him a couple of things. I told him that tradition was not necessarily truth. And I had a reason for saying that. Tradition is good, and sometimes is truth. But sometimes the tradition that we carry today is not what we were taught in our youth. I also mentioned that I was influenced by 3 teachers. Ms. Hudson, who taught Latin, and Clarabelle Seimer, who taught civics and American history, and Roy Chambliss, who taught speech. Now in Ysleta, speech was not only how to make a speech, but how to keep from sounding like a Texan. It's often been said that El Paso is a cosmopolitan part of the Southwest and not necessarily like the rest of Texas. And I believe that. I don't know how well he took my advice, but one of the things I told him was, this is a very important time in your lifetime and my lifetime as well. It's a time when we have to make a decision about things that affect the next generation. Recently on the news, a person whose name was Al Armendariz brought up something that sounded familiar to me. He told the story. By the way, Al is in charge of environmental protection problems with the current administration, and he was having trouble expressing his opinions to corporate America about what they should be doing. And he told the story of a centurion who, when entering a small village in an area where they had conquered, would encounter the first 5 people and crucify them. And from there on out, the rest of the village was very cooperative with what he wanted to do. That sounded really familiar to me. And so I began to investigate. Armendariz is a familiar name to me. I knew a couple of people who used that name. And so I looked up Al, and lo and behold, I kept getting Ysleta High School as a possible connection in the search engine. So I checked that Al was a graduate of Ysleta High, and Al, I don't know whether it was this Al, was a graduate of Ysleta High in 1970, 72 era. This is 70, 72. I began to count backwards, and I says, oh, I know that Armendariz that were there then. One of them was in my Latin Gens Togata club, which was Latin students that studied under Miss Hudson. And I'd heard that story about the centurions from Miss Hudson. And so I assumed maybe there was a connection there. A generation prior, I must have gone to high school with his father. And so I began to reflect on all the things that I had learned in high school. The things I learned from Clarabelle Seimer about the Constitution and the principles that made an American, and so forth. And I says, I adhere to those things. I also began to find things in the search engine about other students of Ysleta who had been active in politics and who had engaged with the Democrat Party at the time because of their relationship between Hispanics and Americans. And doing that research, I discovered after 55 years or so that I was one of the pasty-faced kids that they were talking about. But I had very little distinction between the Hispanics that I knew and myself. And I didn't know that Rene Baca was possibly Hispanic, even though Baca has got to be a Spanish name. But so I learned a few things, and I learned that those who were trained up in that tradition could no more understand a conservative Republican thought, and that they were really ensconced in their tradition and never able to escape that. Well, I think that's a problem, and my advice to him, I think, was true, that you have to re-examine all the traditions that you know and determine that there really is truth in the traditions that you hold. One of the things that I was reminded of is what I learned about government and civics. 1952 was the last year that there was a senior trip sponsored by Ysleta High School. The seniors had gone to Chihuahua, and there had been some problems in the trip, and the school had decided not to sponsor any more senior trips. And of course my class, the class of 53, was just incensed. We did not get to have a senior trip. So, and the only way I knew how, I tried to make an appointment with Clyde Wafer, who was the god of authority in my life at the time, and I was unsuccessful. And so I made a sign, I put it on a wooden board, and I marched outside the office in the main hall where Kalaja now stands. And of course, I was called in to have a conversation with Clyde Wafer. And in the ensuing conversation, I cried. And I cried because Clyde Wafer called me a communist because I was demonstrating in front of his office. And I said, that's not fair. These are what people do when they can't get the attention of the government. So, by the time we got through, we started talking, and I told him what my problem was, and he listened to me. He told me what his problem was. I listened to him, and we concluded that, yeah, the school would not sponsor the senior trip. I asked, would you stop me from organizing a senior trip? He said no. And so that led to the organization of the trip where the seniors went to Ruidoso. We established that parents would be the drivers and the chaperones, and everybody would pay their way. It would not be sponsored in any way. School would not be responsible. Not everybody was allowed by their parents to go, but a significant number did go. We had a banquet. We paid our own way. I collected the money down to the last nickel. We were able to pay our bills and get out of Ruidoso without any incidences. And many people have expressed their thankfulness that they were able to experience a trip like that. And so that was my lesson in civics. I learned it in high school. The point. One of the things I learned later in life, and I thought it was particularly insightful, is TANSTAFL. TANSTAFL. Here's how you spell it. See if I can see it on the screen here. There you go. TANSTAFL. Stands for There Ain't No Such Thing as a Free Lunch. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. What has that got to do with government? I think it has a lot. In spite of the fact that I was pretty successful after I left school, I left El Paso, and I got to working around the country, it was always kind of interesting to me that a free lunch seemed to be something that I was always looking for in conferences and things like that, looking for the free lunch. And TANSTAFL says there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. What does that mean? It means you have to pay a price. Now, the whole concept of a date between a man and a woman is sometimes the free lunch. And what do you have to pay for the free lunch? Well, sometimes the payment is more than you would have normally been able to justify. Such it is with the government. Whenever we're offered a free lunch, there's a price for it. And the price is long-term indebtedness, loss of control over our decisions, whatever. It's a philosophical thing, it's a political thing. It is probably closer to truth than the fact that the government is responsible for the important decisions in our life. If you've been able to draw these points in your experience when you're training with what is happening today, you realize this is probably the most important time of our lives. The time when we have to participate in government, not by putting a sign up and marching in front of a building or anything like that, but by talking to your friends and your neighbors and passing on the good word, the gospel of there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And the decision we have to make is between the free lunch bunch and the people who are willing to take the responsibility for their lives and to actually control what happens to us now and all the people that follow after us. So I urge you to pay attention and be active. I think that if you know that not only your vote, but the influence you have on the people who live around you and who respect your opinion is the most important thing you can do to improve the government in this country. I've since become active in other things besides technology and magic and mind reading and all the fun things I used to do, and become politically active. I have a preference for president, but I want you to find out and learn for yourself what that is. Go to ignoramus.us. Let's see if I can write it like they do on TV. Okay, ignoramus.us. Ignoramus is a Latin word I learned that from Miss Hudson. Ignoramus is a complete sentence. It means we don't know. Ignoramus. We don't know. If you say it like a question, it means, what do we know? And in that case, you can explain it. And I leave this with you, with the challenge. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, try to influence this election so that we don't get entrapped by the free lunch bunch. Thank you. I hope to see you again.